Here we go.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Okay, so yeah, thanks very much everybody for coming. I'm sorry if my voice is not great. I'm recovering from a flu, and this is actually the best day I'm having so far. A couple days
Can
ago,
you speak a little closer to the mic, Khaled?
can you hear me?
It's really soft.
Testing, testing. How about now?
A little better.
And
Get closer to the mic. I think it'd be good.
Jay, it looks like you need to press OK because there's a bar at the top of the screen now.
Testing, testing. Y'all can hear me okay?
I'm sorry. What?
On at least on my computer, there's a bar at the top of the screen that says this is being recorded, and then you have to press OK.
You have to press OK.
Yeah,
Do I have to do that?
yeah.
Oh,
If
okay.
you wanted to go away, I guess, yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right, so everybody's hearing me okay, right?
Yep.
We're good.
Yeah, much better.
Okay, great. So, once again, thanks for coming. Let's dive right into it. So, the reason we all here is to talk about compression. So let's see, who do we have on the call? We have Nick, Jacob, David, Joseph, Mike, Murray. Finally, nice to see you face to face after
Yes,
so many
same
years.
here.
Jay and Christo, right? Okay, so we all here because we want to learn a little bit more about compression. I don't claim to be any sort of expert whatsoever, but I'm happy to share with you what I've learned over the years and stuff, and impart anything I possibly can. So at the beginning of this, since over a week ago when we posted this, or a couple of days ago, um, David very kindly submitted one of his tracks for me to mix, specifically the drum kit, but I ended up mixing the whole thing so that you could have better context. Just to sort of see what can be done with compression, how you can get some different tones, and basically how you can achieve what you are trying to get. And that's the first thing. Any of us who has been mixing for a while, one of the most difficult things to start off with is understanding what do you want to begin with, right? When you listen to tracks put together, the most important thing before you grab any EQ compressors or anything like that is you need to start identifying things to do, right? If not, what do you hope to achieve by grabbing all these plugins? Okay, you certainly don't want to be doing anything just because you think you have to be doing it, right? So, as we all know, compression is probably the hardest thing for any of us to hear, right? It is usually very, very subtle, and typically speaking, if it has been applied to the point where you can hear it, it's probably too much. So, with all that in mind, before we get into David's track, I made a little test here to just this is compression 101 for us to at least understand what we're talking about before we go into an actual mix. So what I did is I recorded my little snare drum over here. I just beat it repeatedly a couple times and recorded it just to get some waveforms that we can move around with. A single drum, something like a snare, is the easiest thing to build your ears on when it comes to compression, because it's just a very short, sweet waveform. It's usually very uniform. It does not much variance to it whatsoever. Okay? So, now, I should also say that because of my voice the way it is, I'm not going to be doing all the talking, okay? This is going to be very interactive, okay? So be prepared to be picked on because I'm going to be asking people in the class, all right? So first and foremost, let's listen to this snare. And what I'm going to do is, hang on, right, is I'm going to turn on a compressor and I'm going to ask one of y'all to tell me what you hear, okay? So here it goes. I'm going to play it for a couple bars, and you'll see when I turn on the compressor, okay? Everybody hearing that okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm playing it for, say, two more bars, and then I'll turn it on. David, what did you hear?
That was different.
Sorry?
It was different. I think you turned
It's
it on.
different?
Probably had slightly less ringing tail to it.
Okay. I see Mike has put on his headphones, so he's listening in high def now. So let's try that again. Mike, this is for you. Mike, you hear anything? Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, so I hear the impact and a slight ring, a high-pitched kind of tone after the beat.
Do you hear anything after I turned on the compressor?
Say that again.
Did you hear any difference when I turned on the compressor?
Can't say that I did.
Okay, good, because that was a dirty trick, because this compressor has absolutely nothing on it. Okay?
I feel much better now.
That was
I'm not hearing shit here.
Right. So this is an exercise in what we call confirmation bias. Okay. So, and it's a psychological thing. Just because you see, something on or a meter moving or so doesn't mean that you're hearing it. Okay. And sorry about that, David. I just had to grab everybody's attention. Okay. So it's not, that was a dirty trick. I know that's my bad. Okay. So, but the point is that we need to make sure that we are hearing it. And if you don't hear it, then we need to ask ourselves, is this something that we need to be doing? Right? So, and just to prove to you, there's no needle moving here or anything. There's no compression here whatsoever. Okay? So that was the dummy compressor. Now, this one is the real compressor. And as you'll see, the meter moves. Clearly, we have something going on. Okay? Now, what I've done is this is the raw track here. This top one is the raw track. And what I've done is I've basically compressed this in two different ways and then just bounce the tracks down. So these two tracks down here, so these two blue tracks down here are the same track as number one, but this is after the compression happened. I just bounced it down, bounced it in place. Okay. So what I want to do, can I put you all somewhere else? Okay, good. Yeah. So let's start off by zooming in to these waveforms to see what is different about these waveforms. So once again, these three tracks here are the same raw file, but this one has medium compression and this one has high compression. What can we see about this area here? Jacob.
Well, the tail is louder, right? And the ring of the snare itself.
Right. So the tail is louder. And that's essentially what we want out of compression, right? Okay. What about this section here? And let me zoom into that a little bit more. Not so much. Okay, just in general, what can you see difference? What major differences do we have on those three sections there? What's called the front end transient.
The volume.
The volume, yes, but there's a definite change in shape, right?
Yeah, the transient should be more pronounced than the second one.
So the transient is more pronounced in the second one compared to the third one, right?
And first
And certainly,
one.
sorry?
And first one.
And first one. So how did that happen? Because aren't compressors supposed to make transients shorter? Right? Aren't compressors supposed to squash everything down? How is it possible that after compression, a transient can now look sharper than the raw file? How is that possible? Anybody want to take a whack at it?
Yeah, this is the attack, and so the compressor starts working later.
Absolutely. Can you please, seeing as you understand it, can you expand on that for everybody else, please? What does attack do? And let me pull up the compressor. Where can I put you all that you'll not anyway? Okay.
I think it's actually easier first to understand like why the tail is louder, right? And the tail is louder because you do the makeup gain. So you turn the volume up after the compression. That's why the tail is louder. And the attack is not louder initially, not initially, but after that is because of the compression starting to work, right? And reducing the volume. But the spike is because of the attack time. So you have attack time like about 10 milliseconds there, or 11, whatever it is.
Right.
Right. So in the first 12 milliseconds after like start of the transient, let's say like after it crosses the threshold, nothing happens. So it just passes through, and then the compressor starts to compress, and that's why there's a sharp decline in volume right after the peak.
Cool. Guys, if you please interject with questions as soon as you have one, okay? Because if you stay quiet, then I'm gonna move on, right? But by all means, please let's talk about anything that y'all want to dive into deeper or that you don't fully understand. Go ahead, Mike. I see you have.
One thing there's, so we're compressing with our eyes here. What does it sound like when you bounce back and forth between the two? How am I hearing that?
We'll do that. Absolutely. Let's do that. Okay. So let's look at, so basically everything that Jacob said there is true. When I compressed this, excuse me, there's the first one. Yeah. When I compressed this track to create this medium compression, essentially what I did is I had a slow attack, right? And well, whatever release, we're not talking about release just yet, but I created it with a slow attack and some fairly heavy compression, right? Or medium compression, I should say. But by backing off the attack, it allowed the front end transient to pass, and then the compressor held on. So let's hear what that sounds like. So we're gonna mute everything here. Actually, let me take a couple bars. Sorry, 1 second. Oh, sorry. Ha 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 ha. That's because I have the compressor on.
Now that's different. There you go.
Okay, so more than likely, what you are hearing, certainly what I am hearing more than anything else, is how much louder the tail is, because you can really hear the shimmer of the wafer inside the snare, right? Everybody hearing that? You're definitely hearing that tail, but where you will appreciate the front end transient is when I compare it to this one here. So this this one has heavy compression with a very fast attack time, and the front end of it is completely squashed. Okay, which you can see on visually as well, but the medium one has a lot more punch to it because I let the front end transient through, right? But the second one, the high compression one, has a lot more tail, a lot more body to it. Once again, let me play it again. So far, so good. Questions, Mike? Happy with that so far, right?
Yeah.
So we'll get into it more, right? Now, that is once again as basic as we can get. All right, let's not spend too much time on that because we have a long way to go. But basically, so we have these controls: threshold, ratio, makeup, gain. We know what this does, right? You adjust the threshold to figure out how much of the signal how deep into the signal you want to bite into. You adjust the ratio to figure out how much you want to squash it by. And the makeup gain is, in general, at least to start off with, you want to add the makeup gain based on how much gain you've lost. Cool? Right? And you usually have, every compressor is a little different, but you usually have 2 meters, like one here and one here. And you can see input and output makeup gain, right? So let's leave that right there. Oh, and also obviously you have attack and release and the knee and that kind of thing. Well, I don't know anybody who really uses the knee and genuinely knows what the hell they're talking about. So let's leave that alone. Okay. Let's talk about this one. This is a different signal. This is a different pattern. I'm going to turn off the compressor so you can hear the raw signal. All right, so somebody's getting ready to walk the plank with that kind of drum groove, right? So once again, I'm adding some compression. Why do you want to add compression? Because obviously you want to have things even out and have things be heard, right? But there's a major problem with this signal, because it's of this part right here, right? This is something this is an area that's obviously very different from what we were dealing with before. So the thing that we have to think about now when we have something like this is not just attack time, but release time. Okay? So once again, are we all happy with how attack time works? Tell me if I'm moving too fast, huh? I assume that a lot of this is kind of already known, but we can go over it, right? So once again, attack time is how much of the signal you're letting through first before the compressor grabs hold of it. So a slower attack time means that the signal is going to be more punchy because more of the original signal is coming through. And also, when you're adding makeup gain, more of that front end transient is also being boosted as well. Okay, which is why it's louder. Okay, basically anything outside of what is being specifically compressed is being boosted when you add makeup gain. Okay, so but this area here is more complicated. So let's hear what happens when we adjust the release time. So I'm going to start off by turning on the compressor so you can hear what it does. So everybody's happy so far that they can hear the difference with the compressor on? Yes?
Yeah.
Good. Right. So the attack time here is about 13 milliseconds. So once again, this is similar to the medium compression I had here, where we want a nice punchy front end transient, right? Preserve the front end. But this, more importantly, is now we have to think about release time, because what the release time is, I'm sure many of you know, it's the time that you're setting to allow the compressor to let go of the signal in preparation for the next time it's going to grab onto it. Okay? So, excuse me. So if we have let's start manipulating this release time, and then you're going to tell me what you hear. All right, David, tell me what you're hearing. What did you just hear when I increased the release time?
The first few hits kind of got quieter, but didn't have that kind of contrast between before you got to the three sort of drum rolls.
Contrast is an interesting word. Can you expand on that, please?
Well, by the time you crank the time a fair bit, it was getting a lot more even, so it was losing a lot of that kind of crispness that you had in the hits to begin with. So it's
And
much more uniform throughout the pattern.
Oh, okay, cool. I agree. So why do you think that is?
It's not hitting the front transient. The first one is, by the time it's sort of taking a long time to let go of things, it's not kind of getting to the next one as quickly as it would.
Exactly. So as David said, the compressor is not letting go in time for the next transient that's coming up, right? So let's push this extreme to the extreme and hear what happens. Notice the meter up on top never ever goes down. Okay? We're doing basically a solid, 11 to 12 dB of gain reduction, and the meter and the compressor never ever, what did I press? Yeah, and the compressor never ever gives up. Okay? So this is where release time comes into play, because basically when we are adjusting the release time, we want to take a look at our signal, or a closer look or a closer listen as to how, in essence, staccato is the signal, and how much do we want things to be evened out, or do we want it to preserve the punchiness. Now, I'm not saying that having a quick release time like this I'm not saying that that is how it needs to be done all the time. Not at all. I'm just saying that this may be something that you want in the mix. Maybe you do actually want these that drum roll there to be very punchy, right? Or maybe it's too punchy and you want to squash it down a little bit because it's basically getting in the way and distracting from other instruments in the mix. So, let's see if we could find a common ground. Maybe somewhere around there. Depends on the context. Okay? Okay. Any questions on release time so far?
No, but it's basically the time that the compressor has to reset itself. It's not going to do another initial attack determination if it's still in this sort of cycle of compression, right?
Correct. Yeah. Right. So, good. Happy to move on?
Is there going to be math involved?
No.
No.
Not at all.
Actually,
I'm sorry, I expressed myself strangely most of the time, so.
I'm curious.
I guess in another meeting we just decided that we're basically all IT guys, old IT guys, except for Khalid who flies helicopters. So,
and here it is. The pilot is the one telling IT guys about this stuff. How is that happening?
Yeah. Well, no, it's all good.
And Christopher, you got a point there, I think, too, is there any relationship between release time and tempo?
Kind of. As far as I know, yes. In the sense that so that's actually one of the things that you do. In the way that I learned how to use release time, it kind of has to sort of, it ties in a little bit with your tempo, because basically where your tempo is where the beats are going to be. So what you want to do is you want to essentially tune your release time to the tempo so that the compressor gets out of the way in time for the next beat. Now, if you want to work out that mathematically in terms of milliseconds, you're on your own.
Well, that's facetiously why I asked if there was going to be math involved, because it seems like in many cases you would want to have it be in conjunction with the beat of the song, beats per minute.
Right. But the good news is you don't have to work it out, because you have a nice little meter here, which visually represents or visually shows you when the compressor is getting out of the way, right? Because you can see when the needle dips back down like this, right, you can see the compressor physically getting out of the way and releasing the signal. So you could just do it visually and kind of average it. You know, the more mathematical you get about music, the less artistic it gets, right? Okay, let's move on because we still want to talk about David's song. This is just a precursor. Okay, here is an example of a little bit more of an advanced approach to compression, which is a technique that I use. So right off the bat, what you can probably see is a very, very wide set of dynamics. You have some tall transients and some very short transients, okay? And this is this can be a very tricky situation to compress. So let's play a little bit of it first of all. Okay, don't worry about if it sounds in time or not. That's not the point. The point is you can hear that there's very quiet and very loud bits, right? Cool. So if this brings me to the topic of what I like to call overloading compressors. So if I were to try to squash those transients in one compressor to get the whole thing, it's going to be essentially too much. So here's how I approach something like this. What I start off by doing is I start trying to identify only the large transients. And I do that with the use of the threshold. Okay? And I basically squash those down. So I may add some makeup gain. In this case, I did for a reason I'll get into shortly. But this stage is not about adding makeup gain as it is more to do with just bringing those big transients down to a closer level as everything else. Okay? And once again, you can adjust your attack time and release time to kind of fine tune how well you grab onto the very tops of those transients. So now let me play it before and after. Let me play it without. So it's 3 dB. So let's hear what it sounds like just without adding any makeup gain to those transients. So this is the signal, and I'll turn it on afterwards. All right, so if you were following along, you should have seen basically the meter was only moving for those very tall transients, right? The quieter hits, on the other hand, were completely unchanged. And that's what we want. We don't want those to be affected. Those are the level we basically want them to be, right? Now, that for the most part, let's see how much gain reduction we were getting there. All right, so somewhere around 5, 6, 7 dBs of gain reduction. Now, if I were to increase the makeup gain to 7 dB, what that's going to do is that it's going to make the quiet sections way too loud. Okay? And let's hear how that sounds. So I'm going to add, let's say 6 dB. Now, I know this is subtle, right? But in this particular case, this is what it's kind of called ghost notes. When you play drums, anybody knows about ghost notes. Ghost notes are little tiny hits that are not really meant to be heard. Okay, so there's a driving beat, and you might have like a couple ghost notes in there which are very quiet, and they're supposed to be kind of more quiet. So if you go and add the full amount of makeup gain here to make up what you just lost by squashing those very loud transients, you're basically making those ghost notes way too loud. Okay, so all I've done here is I've added 3 dB of makeup gain. Okay, as a first step. So I'm trying just basically barely bringing up the low parts a little bit, just to get a little bit of middle ground. Okay, so that's the first stage, and it's not very much. It's just the first stage. Here's the second stage now. Here's where the whole signal is going to be compressed. So let me pull up these 2 compressors. Okay, so first stage is on the left, second stage is on the right. Okay, so notice right away the first stage had a very low threshold. The second stage has a much higher threshold. Okay, the first stage also has a very high ratio, 8:1. The second stage has a fairly low ratio, 2.5:1. Okay, the attack and the release more or less the same. The release on this one was a little bit shorter so the release on the second stage is shorter because now that I'm actually hitting all those ghost notes, I don't want to squash them too much. Okay, so let's play it now. I'll turn on the second stage as well. I'll turn it. It's off right now. I'll turn it on shortly. All right, and let me take out, now that's both stages there, so let's play it without, and then we'll turn the whole thing on. Hear any difference? Come on, there must be a question in there or something. Somebody say something. Tell me.
But I still think that you're keeping the compared to the first one where you we just at one stage. I mean, you still have, and when you boosted the signal and with the makeup gain, you lost the dynamics completely of the playing.
Yes.
So it was meant to be ghost notes, but it was just sort of just as loud. So this was a good way of keeping the dynamics, but still making them be heard.
Right. Good. Thank you. Right, and this here is the bounced product. So we can zoom in and actually see. Excuse me. God damn it. Right, kind of what's been done to the signal. Right. So look at these. Look at some of these transients here. Right. Definitely smaller in the compressed version, right? And there's obviously, you can see, not that one. Yeah, you can see the tails, how much larger the tails are, right? So there is compression happening. Look at this one. This is an interesting one here. Let's zoom into that a little bit. Right? So this massive transient has definitely been squashed down, and it's far more uniform now. So the ghost note, which happens right afterwards, is far closer in volume to the front end, where in the uncompressed version, there's a massive difference. Okay? So happy with that so far? Any questions on this?
Yeah, I have a question about makeup gain. First, if you had not done that, couldn't you have used just makeup gain at the end to basically get things back to pretty much an overall volume similar to what you'd started out at, or is makeup gain essential at each stage of the game?
The reason I used makeup gain on this particular sample is because of how wide the dynamics were from the first stage, in the first stage of compression. So basically, the first compressor is there because these things happen in series. The second compressor is working off of the signal generated by the first compressor. So what the first compressor is there to try to prepare the signal for the second compressor, right? So it by squashing the large transients and bringing up the noise floor just a little bit, it gave me a better platform to now grab onto the whole signal in the second stage. If I hadn't done that, I would have had to now increase the threshold even more to get down into those ghost notes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So, but once again, this is why. But this in the same argument, I don't want to add the full amount of makeup gain because then that will make the ghost notes too loud. So it's a little bit of a back and forth. Okay. All right, guys. So if there are no more questions, let's head over to David's project. And then no more questions, right, on this? So it'll take just a minute or two to load up, and I guarantee when I try to play it back first, my CPU will crash, but no need to be alarmed. Just a little i5 Intel processor trying its best. All right, so this is David's mixed track. Where can I put you all that is not in my way? Okay, no, you're still in my way. Come over here. Okay. All right. So turn off as many of these things as possible. Now, how many of y'all got a chance to listen to the static mix before the session? You had homework, but I guess nobody did.
Just very briefly.
Right. Okay. Cool. At least, hopefully David listened to it. Maybe at least one person did. Okay. So
would it be helpful to play maybe parts of it?
I'm going to play it here right now. So this is basically the static mix, right? So there are many things I can talk about in terms of my process about how to go about setting things up to give yourself the best platform to work with. But let's try to keep it as focused as possible. If you see anything that you want to know about, by all means, we could go into it, okay? So let's just play a little bit of track. Remember, we're mostly interested in drums here.
It's muted, Khaled.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Crap. All right. Fair enough. Sorry, I muted so that I wasn't going to cough in everybody's ears, but I guess that muted everything. Okay. Right. So, well, anyway, hopefully played enough, right? Now I'm gonna put back everything on, and you can hear the difference, and then we'll break it down as to how we got there. All the buses. Okay, let's stop it right there. Tell me, Miri, what did you hear? What was a major difference? What was something that stood out to you right away?
Well, and the drum's definitely louder, and in the static track, it was, at least to my ears, it was fairly boomy, and that was reduced after the compression.
Okay. Mike, you agree with that? You hear anything? We want to add anything to that?
I mean, it just sounded fuller to me, and just more upfront. I mean, I thought at first the drum sounded too loud, and as you brought the mix in, it seemed to fit in the pocket a little bit better. But
okay, David, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the original drum sound was a lot more kind of sort of gentle. I think that when he said that's beginning to head a bit more into Phil Collins territory with a big kind of sort of echo around the drum. It's definitely a way more fuller and more powerful set with probably sounds to be more effects on it than I started with.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on. So even without any effects, right? I'm removing all the ambience. Let's just listen to the difference in the raw drum sound versus just the mixed drum sound. So that'll include EQ, an exciter, and compression, right? So this is the raw drum sound, the raw snare sound, sorry. Okay, I did that in incremental stages. I don't know about you, but to me, the thing there that made the most noticeable difference was the compression. The EQ made a little difference, the exciter brightened it up a little bit, but then the compression is where it brought out the full body. Did y'all get that, or would you like me to play it again?
Can you play it raw and then with everything? Don't
Sure.
Just step them up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right.
Certainly had a fuller sound with the compression.
and the kick's coming in, the bleed is coming through louder.
Sorry, say that again, Mike.
It's not like the bleed from the kick was coming in louder.
Nope, there's no kick on this signal. This is just a snare, but it sounds more beefy.
But
Right.
again, it's a little louder, but I noticed the meter stayed the same. So
I could guarantee you there's no kick bleed on this signal. It's just a snare.
There is kick.
Yeah.
But it comes from coming out.
feels like kids to me in the back there.
Oh shit! Sorry. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I am hearing a kick now.
Yeah, so many of these.
Where the hell is that coming from?
You generally get it. It's part of EZ drummer, which are normally recorded as live drums, so it's not unusual to have a bit of bleed on it.
It could also come from the reverb, because even though if your track is muted, it goes to the bus 3, and bus 3 could work.
I turned off bus 3.
Kick.
Shouldn't
the
be any
bus.
kick. There shouldn't be any kick on that. That's weird. Must be something with the routing, with the bus routing, because there's literally no kick on the signal. So it must be. We see something.
No, I need one of those speakers.
All right, forget about that. Right, I don't know where that kick is coming from. It must be something in the bus routing or something. No problem. Okay, point is that
That's fine.
right. So we agree that it sounds fuller. Okay, and
No, I just got him.
there is far more body to it. There's far more. I mean, it still has a lot of snap. Like the original signal for me had a lot of snap to it. So I definitely tried to preserve that snap, but I definitely wanted more body, right? So how did I go about doing that there? And I should also, let me actually play it with everything, because there's even more going on. Right, so this, excuse me, this is actually, I don't do this often, but this is actually a snare where I did use parallel compression. I don't use it very often, but I did want as much body as possible. So this is one of the few cases where I did use a parallel compressor. Okay, so
Can you do that again and mute the kick drum next to the snare? There's a bleed from
I don't know where that bleed is coming from. I don't know where it is, but it's not on the track itself. So that's a little bizarre, but we shall persevere. Okay, right. So let's take a look at what we have going on here. So first thing first is my EQ. Let's take off all of this other stuff. EQ is necessary before compression because it prepares the signal for compression, right? I have heard of people who add EQ after compression, maybe as an effect or maybe to clean up things further. But for me, it makes the most sense to put EQ before compressor so that what you're compressing is what you actually want, right? So with the EQ here, what I've done is I've scooped out, a lot of the low end, well, all of the ultra low stuff, and I've given it a little bit of boost as to where I kind of found that meat, right? And in the original signal, there was something I didn't quite like about the signal. Once again, this is just me, personal preference, in that I found the snare kind of had a sort of a, the only word that comes to mind is a matchbox kind of tone to it, like a very small matchbox tone, something about that. And I'll play it again so you could probably hear it. Okay, so that was basically, that frequency or that bunch of frequencies was kind of around here. Okay, that's when I looked around for it. That was the kind of frequency that I didn't like. And with this EQ on, and obviously I put a little boost in here as well. just cleans it up a little bit. And the high end boost is also to kind of bring out a little bit more of that crispy snap out of it. Okay. The next thing is exciter, which I tend to put exciters on practically all the tracks because they add some good high frequency clarity. Okay, so this one is with an exciter from Isotope, from Neutron, basically, and playing around with it, this was the level of fuzz that I liked. Hang on, let me play out this section now. Oh, come on. Right. Can you hear what that's doing? Yes? Sort of makes it a little bit more fuzzy because, I mean, a snare is something you want a little fuzz on it, right? So this kind of helps scatter it out a little bit more. Creates some of those overtones, some of those harmonics, right? Good with that so far? Right? Sorry. Okay. So now that has given me a good signal to deal with for the compressor. So what do I have going on here with the compressor? This is the main compressor, right? Well, I have a fairly, decent medium threshold, 5-to-1 ratio, and I believe I lost 5 dB of gain, so I put back 5 dB. This is not the slowest attack in the world, but it was enough, right? A fairly medium attack for a snare, and a fairly more or less medium release as well. So let's hear what this compressor has done. Okay, Jacob, tell me what did you hear? What is this compressor doing? What are we hearing?
Well, I kind of hear also more, like a little bit more of the initial attack, like crack, like punchy, and also the longer tail.
Definitely hearing more tail, right? Questions on this so far? Something you want to hear differently or anything? Mike, you good?
Good.
All right, cool. So now the parallel compression. So what I have here is I have a send going to bus 1, and I have a parallel compressor. And this is in the interest of creating even more body signal to add to the snare, because the original snare for me was very, very thin. It was just very, very transient and didn't have a whole lot of information. So everything I've done here so far is to try to scatter the snare as much as possible while still maintaining some punch to it. So I have a send, I have the compressor here, and it is like basically the entire signal. This is huge compression. So 40 dB on the threshold, 8-to-1 ratio, and 20 dB of makeup gain. And the attack is 0. I've grabbed onto the entire thing from the beginning, and well, it's a quick release because I just want that front end transient squashed. Okay, and this is what this sounds like. Right, so you can hear how completely squashed that is, right? That has no front end transient whatsoever. It's like a block, okay? So what I've done is I have that on a bus, and all I've done now is just mix it to taste. So by adjusting the fader, I brought it in. So let's do that now. Let's start with it all the way down. right? Do you hear how it comes in there and how it adds to the signal? Yes? Mike, you look concerned.
No, I was just looking at how you were routing the buses. But yeah, that's what you're saying.
Cool. Yeah. So when I had mixed this, basically I didn't need much. So I had it like around down there. Okay. So that's the compression. Next step on trying to make this snare as large as possible to give David that Phil Collins thing he talked about was to now build ambience. Okay. So bus 3 is a reverb. Let's hear what. So it's a snare reverb. Yep, sorry, hang on. What am I doing? It's very subtle. You won't hear it very much, but. Okay, so this one has a very long tail. The tail is set to 1 bar, and it has pre-delay set on it as well. Do we know what pre-delay is? Can somebody explain to me what pre-delay on a reverb means?
Lightness.
Sorry?
They enlighten us.
Okay. Pre-delay is a cool thing. What it does is it sets how long or how much of a signal is going to pass through before the reverb holds on to it. It's a kind of cool, and it creates a cool effect. It sounds kind of like a delay, but it's not. So this means that an eighth, in this case, an eighth note triplet of time is going to pass through with no reverb applied, and then the reverb is going to be applied on everything after that. And you could set to how long. So an eighth note, will pass and be unaffected by the reverb or quarter note or whatever. Okay? This is something very useful for drums because it helps create, it kind of sounds like a delay, like a digital delay, but it's not. And what it really does is it helps keep the signal cleaner, because it means that only the sort of like the second half of the signal is going to have reverb on it, so that the front half is still going to be clean and punchy. Does that make sense? Because we know reverb scatters everything around. So in the case of a snare drum, if you have the front end of it be unaffected by reverb, it means that you maintain clarity. So let's hear what that sounds like. I'll make it drastic. Can you hear how the reflection happens? There's a delay when the reflection happens. Yeah? So that's all it's doing. It's a cool little trick in this. So a lot of reverbs have it, and practically all reverbs have it. Second thing is I always EQ the reverb. So I cut out the low stuff and the high stuff and just leave the meat. Right? Keeps the signal clean.
Is that before or after?
It's built into the reverb, but this is EQing the reverb itself. So it's I guess you could kind of call it after. This would be post reverb. This is reverb. Sorry, this is EQ on the reverb signal itself, not on the source signal. So it will be post reverb, post EQ, essentially.
I have a hard time when things are built in to particular VSTs and they do a whole bunch of different things. I never know exactly what happens in what order. They say it's simultaneous, but it's not. Obviously, something has to happen first. I don't know when you say it's in conjunction with the reverb. it's either got to go before the reverb happens or after, one or the other, right?
Well, no, because this is shaping the tone of the reverb itself. So because this is built into the reverb, this is essentially shaping the actual reflections. You know, this is shaping the actual reverb being generated. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess then it sounds like it's happening right before. So the reverb is taking advantage of the EQ before it actually starts echoing, or whatever you want to call it.
No, it's after. It even says here it's output EQ, right? Right on the top it says output EQ.
Yeah.
It's after the reverb.
Yeah, it is after.
All right, well, that's a dumb question then in this case.
No, not at all, not at all. And as a matter of fact, I think if you go, because it's details and it's main, I believe this is an EQ as well, and this will probably be before. This should be a pre EQ, and this will be a post EQ. So, but yeah, this because a pre EQ would shape the signal that's going into the reverb. Yeah,
which is the Abbey Road trick? Is that before or after?
I think it's after.
It's
and
after,
technically, the Abbey Road trick would actually look more like this. So the Abbey Road trick has a high pass and a low pass, but it also has a dip somewhere around like about 2,000 to 3,000 hertz. That's the Abbey Road trick, and that's actually how I do most of my reverb. That works the best for me.
Okay, and that's after.
Post, yes, is after. All right, so that is first step in building the ambience. That's what it sounds like. Second step, bus 4, is a delay, and it's a slap delay. So this is the Phil Collins effect. Right? Because basically this song sounded a little bit 80s-ish to me, as most of David's work sounds to me. And 80s means slap delay. You know?
We usually go for 70s.
70s.
David, you're so young.
So yeah, there's slap delay on everything, especially there's a lot of slap delay on David's vocal as well, because I don't know. Some voices sound really good with slap delay. Mine doesn't, David's does. So yeah, typical slap delay, nothing too fancy there. These are the EQ parts as well, and it's a very, very narrow EQ band, which is being allowed to reflect. I think that is post EQ, but I'm not prepared for any more of Jay's difficult questions, so I'm not sure. Never really honestly thought about that, but that's a good question. All right, last but not least is another delay, because I like delays. Okay, so that is bus number 7. So this one is a half note triplet and a quarter note. What this one will just be doing is it'll just be kind of, sending things around. This is kind of more in line with a reverb, but basically it's I prefer using delays like this over reverbs, because reverbs tend to add a lot of mud, whereas a delay just gives a reflection and then it goes away. So you get the same scatter, same reflections, but a delay just it appears and then it goes away, whereas a reverb is like a whole blanket, of sound. So this will be the delay. And if I'm perfectly honest, that's even difficult for me to hear. So what that is actually doing. But it's there. So it probably has... Oh, no, that's why. Long delay. That was bus 7. Let's try that again. That's why you're probably getting kick bleed, and many things are routed through certain buses, so maybe that's why you're getting different kinds of bleed. Anyway, okay, so that's the snare. let me talk about any questions on the snare before we move to the kick, because those are the two main things we need to talk about. Happy on the snare.
I have a question.
Tell me.
When you use the term parallel compression, back in the 80s, I was working at a recording studio and parallel compression was called New York compression. And what it was is you have the FET and you'd use an optical compressor. I was wondering why you used the FET twice, like using the same compressor versus using a different compressor.
No real reason. I mean, I have tried using the optical compressor in the past, and it just doesn't give me the effect. It doesn't work well for me. So the FET is definitely my favorite one for most things, and especially drums. You know, the FET works the best for drums. For guitars and vocals and stuff, I may move over to a VCA or maybe even one of the neutron compressors or so. I very, very, very much like Logic's stock compressors. I actually find I have better luck with them than any third-party compressor. Because they're so basic and it's just a needle and no fancy graphics or anything like that, it forces me to use my ears, and, you know, your ears don't lie, you know? Unless they lied to David when I asked him, you know, if he was hearing anything in the beginning. But anyway, so yeah, the FET, I mean, I'm not aware personally that New York compression requires the use of an optical compressor. That would be news to me. If that's true, then so be it. But to me, parallel compression just means having a heavy set of compression that you either use on a bus or you adjust the mix level within the compressor, so there's not a full wet signal. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you can do that in the compressor itself, right? If you don't know, you can use this little mix function here, and basically you can do parallel compression within the compressor. But for me, I kind of prefer to I prefer to use buses and keep signals full wet and then just mix them in on a fader. For me, it's easier to keep track of things like that. All right. So let's move on to the kick, because a kick is a difficult thing. Excuse me. God damn it. All right. Let's say if we get in snare bleed into this kick, knowing my luck. Okay, what's an obvious difference we're hearing so far? Jay.
It's much more room. Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
No, it sounded more roomy, like a lot more space there.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I heard.
That's what I would have said.
Yeah. Okay, Jay, say something else, and make sure it's nice.
I agree with Joe 100%. Could you play the two again, back to back?
Sure.
Yeah, much thumpy. A lot of much more thumpy.
Okay, good. So now we want low end on a kick. That's what it's there for. So you won't typically see a high pass EQ on a kick, right? I did accentuate this frequency and I scooped out some of the mids, right? Because on a kick you don't really need mid so much. That's far more important for other things in the mix, right? So I could do a little scoop there. But I didn't do a full low pass because the kick does have a nice little piece of high end, a little high end thwack to it that I definitely want to keep because that helps add definition to kick, right? Another exciter, nothing exciting about this. Once again, to create some more high frequency information, because high frequency information means clarity, okay? And clarity is very important to be able to define things in a mix. I'm not even going to waste time going into those things. Let's talk about the compression. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the snare compressor next to it. So there's the snare on the right and the kick on the left. So somebody show me, point out something very obviously different about how these two compressors are set up. Let me look for somebody to pick on. Nick, you've been very quiet.
Hey, you're muted, Nick.
That's why I've been quiet. I've been talking all along, but you haven't heard me.
So take a close look and see there's something very, very specific that I want to get to about about the way these two things are set up. I'll give you a hint.
Graph rather than the meter for a start.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let that help. Yeah. And I'll give you a hint. What I'm looking for has to do with the shape of the waveform itself.
That's your knee. Jack around with the knee a little bit.
It's not the knee, because if I changed the knee, it was by accident, because nobody in the world knows what the hell the knee does.
I know what a knee does.
We know what it does on paper. We can't hear it.
You can only hear it if you've got a higher ratio, usually. You can hear it when you get to higher ratios, definitely.
Okay. Well, it's not a high.
You have got a higher ratio for a start.
Well, okay. All right. Let me put you out of misery. Look at the attack time. Look at the attack times on both of these compressors and tell me, why is the kick so much slower than the snare?
I can't actually read it.
Okay, so the attack time on the kick is set to, call it 30 milliseconds, and the attack time on the snare is 13 milliseconds. So the kick has a much, much slower attack time than the snare. Why would that be?
You get more punch if it's slower.
You want more of that thump. I didn't actually like the sound of a thump.
Okay, it's not about if you liked it or not. Okay.
Well, I think it is.
No, it's the fact. Well, okay, fine, but it's about how to get the fact that I wanted to get here. Murray said something very interesting there. Murray, can you please expand?
Well, you get more thump with a slower, or more punch with a slower attack time.
That is true in theory. Why would you need to do that for, or why would you need so much of a slower attack time for a kick?
Keep the transient up is what I would say.
Exactly. The transient of a kick is so much smoother, so much less sharp, or whatever you want to call it, than a snare. A snare is a spear. It's very sharp. It's like a needle. Whereas a kick, because it's so much more low end, it looks like a hump by comparison. Okay? I mean, exaggeration. But the point is that if you're going to compress a kick to make sure that you maintain a good thump to it, a good clear thump, then it means that you have to use a very slow attack time. Does that make sense? Cool, right? So the way that I wanted this kick to sound was to have still some thump to it, but still be able to bring it out. So one of the things I spent quite a bit of time on is dialing in the attack. Not so much the ratio and everything else, but the attack, just trying to fine tune where do I get that level of thump I want. So let's let's play around with that. And let's start off with the dry signal. I'm aware that this is very subtle. Okay? I am aware it's subtle because I can barely hear it myself. But here's what I want you to listen out for. If I bring this attack down all the way, I know it's subtle, but the kick has practically no definition for it. It sounds like somebody just put a wet blanket on it. I'm going to play it again. And now take it off all the way. Are you hearing that?
Yeah, it might be more obvious if you brought the release down so that it's not holding on to it so long.
Bring down the release, you said?
Yeah.
That's more obvious now?
To me, it is.
Yep. For sure. Right? So for me, the middle ground was around here, 29, I think it was. Right? And the reason why I had a little bit of a longer release time was because this song is not about the kick, right? It's about everything else. And I still need to get the kick out of the way of other things in the mix. So it still needs a little bit of shaping, because otherwise, if the tail of a kick is too loud, the whole thing is going to be too boomy. Okay? So, and the only effect here I have is a little bit of the same snare reverb, excuse me. So that's probably where the send is, where the bleed is coming from. But yeah, just to make sure they're all kind of in the same space, right? So let's take a listen to this drum kit with no effects. Come on, what are we doing? Oh. Right? So dry versus with everything. Sorry. All right. Come, somebody hit me with a question. Where's Krista? Krista must have a question. Is he still here?
Left.
Oh, nuts.
Krista left.
Krista went, yeah.
All right. Murray, ask me something.
Well, I'm not sure it's a question. I mean, there's definitely more fullness and character to the kit with those effects in.
David, you've been this is your song. Tell me what you think, or what tell me. You had some questions about how I got to this point, so let me hear from you. David? You're muted.
That's how you're directing that one at me there, sorry. No, for me, it's all impressive. I think what's brought home with this for me a lot is the difference about shaping the sounds of things versus just compressing to make things louder. And I know that you tend to stumble across it a bit when you're doing it yourself. The bit I still struggle with is the kind of structured approach to going through it, how you all affect things at different levels. So it's many kind of smaller changes other than the compression itself that adds up to the overall effect. And I guess it's the where do you start bit is the thing that always gets me, but which is probably why I tend to use more out of the box drum sounds with these said, and I might parallel compress the whole kit, but I don't usually play around that much with what's there.
Yeah, I mean, I also I know what you mean. Certainly, when I put in a drum kit as well, for the most part, if I after looking through a bunch of different kits, when I find something I like, I kind of think, okay, well, that's all it needs to sound like. So why should I go ahead and now change the sound of it? So I could totally understand where you're coming from in that regard. Yeah. And I suppose in this is also why it's a good thing to it's a useful thing, I should say, to have somebody else mix your track sometimes or get an outside opinion, without any kind of bias or emotional attachment whatsoever, because I don't know what you were after or what you wanted it to sound like. I just knew what I thought it should sound like. So I did whatever I needed to do to get it to sound like that,
So what drums were used on this? Was this digital, live, real drums, or
EZ drummer was a starting point, so it's kind of live recorded patterns, but then obviously bung through MIDI, and then as I did with this, you started looking about with it. In fact, I think for once, normally I use preset patterns, but probably half of this I created myself really. Because I told Cal, the original genesis of this was a cover version I'd done a couple of years earlier. That was just basically taking the Bruce Springsteen Philadelphia drum pattern and laying that onto a Rolling Stones track. And I thought I'd have a go at myself really, so I changed the beat a little bit so it wasn't quite so obvious. But it is effectively, an electronic drum thing that has been started with real drum sampling.
See, I guess the thing for me up till this point in time, all of the drums that I've had on my various tracks that I've done have been the ones that are there in Band in a Box, because that's what I tend to use. And that kind of complicates things for me to try and then put effects on those drums, because all of it's there in a stereo track. I don't have each of the drums separated out.
mm-hmm.
Now, the next two projects that I'm going to start working on, I am going to be using either Easy Drummer or Slate or one of those. So I'll have more control over each of the individual components of it. So for me, sometimes it's been a bit of a challenge, just trying to take that stereo track and make each individual component of that sound better.
And that's kind of the point that I was wanting to make with the drum. So if you're using an Easy Drummer or Slate or whatever, it seems to me those sounds are supposed to be pretty close to what you want. They're already compressed, already EQ'd. I mean, it's already laid out, so there shouldn't require a whole lot of work to make those. Is that not the idea behind those, or?
Yeah, it is. And you pick from a range of menus, and you've got mixers, onboard mixers, which you can play with. I guess what brought it down to me is when I kind of did that cover of the wall, kind of my Mammoth project last year, is there wasn't the kind of out of the box Nick Mason kit. So that's when I started moving just basically from a stereo track and started getting into the putting them on individual tracks. And I started to experiment a bit, but without anything like the knowledge that kind of Callan's just sort of demonstrate for us. So it was very much more trial and error, fiddling about with the snare kind of mostly is what I was kind of doing around that. And it did take it to different places. But for me, I was only kind of scratching the surface. So tonight is really good in hearing about much more structured, layered technique to doing this. For me, my personal learning is how you get your head around what are you trying to do and how do you go through that way and sort of achieving it. I think that's also a tricky bit. But I think many things in life, it's probably about practicing and trying and building it up.
And as you say that, let me take the opportunity to show you a couple other things in my workflow. As we have the kick and the bass here, talk a little bit about sidechain compression. So you have a kick and you have a bass. Both of them live in very similar spaces, right? And something has to give. Now, funny thing is, I grew up as a bass player, and I always thought that when you listen to a song that has a really good driving, punchy bass element to it, that's the bass guitar you're hearing. And it's only within like the last year-ish or so, I realized that that's not quite true. It's actually more often than not, and it's something that I have been paying attention to lately, it's more often than not actually the kick drum that you're hearing. You're hearing a really, really beefy kick with the bass around it. But the thing that's giving you the actual punch is actually the kick coming through more than the bass guitar, right? So with that in mind, the bass has to get out of the way for the kick sometimes, right? And the way I do that is with a little dynamic EQ sidechain compression. Everybody familiar with the idea of sidechain compression, right?
Yep.
So sidechain compression is gonna give you compression over the entire frequency. It's gonna compress the entire signal. But we don't need to do that if you have a dynamic EQ, like in this is FabFilter, right? Pro Q3. So this node here is how I have this node set up is with dynamic as a dynamic EQ. So these are static nodes, but this one, the nice thing about FabFilter is you can take one node and make it dynamic. And this one is set to the bus 3, which has the drums in it. So basically what this node is doing is it's saying when a sidechain frequency enters over a threshold in this region here, on the bass, I'm going to make a scoop. And this is what it looks like. We should be saying something, what the hell? So if you notice, basically when the yellow line is only dipping down when the kick reaches the threshold. So check it out again. Notice it only dips in time with the kick. Right? So just for that one set of frequencies, when the kick reaches over a certain threshold, that's when you get that. Okay? But whereas the rest of the frequencies on the bass are untouched, completely untouched. Okay? I still have my boost here and a little roll off on the highs and everything else. Okay? And I have also on a bass, I tend to roll off some of the low end so I can let the low frequencies from the kick come through a little bit more. Because on a bass, you don't really need all this ultra low end down here, below 40 hertz. You ain't hearing that. But that is going to create mud. Okay? So that's one thing. Everybody happy with that one so far, right? A second thing I wanted to show you all. This is my...
Sorry, Carly, why are you doing it at 100? That seems quite high to me.
100? Sorry.
Doing it at 100 hertz, aren't you?
What, the...
No, your side chain.
The side chain? Oh, right. Because...
That's sort of around about a C, isn't it?
Talk about mathematician now. I don't know. Yeah, because on FabFilter was indicating to me that that's where some masking was going on. So let me show you that. Oops. No need to hear all of that. Hang on. Just waiting for it to show up.
Is that because that's where you boosted on the kick? That just seems a bit high for a kick to me, that's all.
Right. Okay, so you see right here, can you see the red band that's popping up over here?
Not really, no.
I'll try to get some of this shit out of here. 1 second. Okay, look on FabFilter here. See this red area?
Yeah.
So this on FabFilter, this shows where your masking is. So what I have overlaid here, I have two signals. The red one is the bass, and then this white one, or I don't know, vice versa. One of them is the bass, one of them is the kick. And this red band shows where you have masking happening. So that is where I decided to just make the scoop.
I just think that's really high. I don't think there's much in a kick at 100 hertz.
No, let's hear it. Let's hear what's in a kick.
Solo it. Can you solo it in the fab filter in case you go ahead and just listen to that range? You can actually hear it.
Well, I want to hear it on a kick. Let's hear it on a kick. So that's at about 100 hertz.
That's where you've boosted.
On the kick, yeah.
Well, that's why it's peaking there. The actual bigger peak without it is actually lower down, which is what you'd expect on a kick.
So for me, I try my best not to make peaks or cuts on fundamental frequencies, because then that's basically just adjusting gain. So it's not about, if you want to, it's, for me, it makes more sense. What are you saying?
Well, I can't see why you're boosting a kick drum at 100 hertz. It just seems really strange. If you don't want to boost it at the fundamental, I understand that. I don't understand why you're doing it at 100. That's a really strange sounding.
Drum, or you lowering the bass? I mean, are you pulling from the bass? Because who's masking whom's? The kick masking the bass, or the bass masking the kick?
Well, both masking each other. They're both living in the same place.
Are you pulling the bass down with the dynamic? That's what I thought you were doing earlier.
Yeah. So this is the kick EQ here.
Right.
And this is the bass EQ. Oh my God, like everybody's gonna start nitpicking at my choices. Lovely. No problem. Okay. So this is like, looking into people's closets and like, what are you doing with those old socks? Okay. So yeah, this is my bass EQ here where I have a scoop, and that's the kick. There's a kick EQ on the right.
Well, I guess it makes sense now that you see you're boosting one and you're lowering the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick.
Well, no, it doesn't. I don't understand that at all. I don't understand why you are boosting a kick at 100 hertz.
Well, I didn't say that.
Strange sounding kick.
Right. All I was saying is I can see that you boosted one and you lowered the other. I am not saying I understand why you chose that frequency.
Well, you have to start there.
I think
you didn't do that.
It must have been something just tonally that I liked on the kick. Let me hear what it was. Yeah, so it was, you know what it is? It was just a little bit of body, without too much low end. That's what I did it. That's at the time it made sense, right? Not saying it still makes sense or whatever, but when I was listening, I wanted a little. I think I must have identified a little bit of punchy low end body without adding mud, because everything below that just sounds like mud, because that's where all the fundamentals are. It doesn't make any sense boosting any of the fundamentals down there, right?
Okay, so as an aesthetic choice, we give you that, and you made it clear how you compensate for boosting one place by lowering the other with a dynamic EQ. Good for you, Khalid.
Well, here's the thing, right? FabFilter, I don't know if you've noticed, is very colorful, and the more nodes you put, the more colorful things get, right? So that's why.
You're into color.
Moving right along. Oh yeah, I'm into color. Look. I mean, geez, can you look at my session here? So here's the next thing I wanted to show you. This is the last thing, but to me, this is the most important thing. Gain staging. Now, I don't know about other DAWs. I mean, I suppose anybody using Studio One and stuff, and Pro Tools and whatever the other one is, this is probably a treat. Look, getting to see what a real DAW looks like, right? But this is how we do. This is how I do gain staging in Logic, right? What did I do? Right. So how I do gain staging is I start off by doing a static mix only with faders, right? Purely with faders, nothing else. So in this case, like most of the faders were way down. They kind of look like what the drum compression look like here, because some of the things are probably like around 6 dB or so, and other things are way down like minus 30 dB and all that kind of stuff. And that was how I make my static mix, just with faders alone, right? There's nothing on the master bus, nothing. And what I'm doing is I'm level matching and I'm making headroom. And the headroom I'm looking for is nothing greater than 6 dB. Typically, I tend to look for around closer to maybe minus 8 to minus 10 dB or so, depending, right? But I pull down all the faders as much as I need to level match. And then the next thing I do is I grab all the tracks and I put a gain plugin on each one of them, okay? And then I go to automation, and this is where it shows up all the automation. These are all automation lines. And as you can see, these blue lines are gain lines, okay? And I grab them, and then I look at my mixing board, and I see, okay, this clean guitar is presently sitting down at, I don't know, minus 10 dB or something on the fader. So basically, I pull the gain down by a certain amount, and then I raise the fader by the same amount. Highly confusing. Let me say that again. So the goal here is to try to get the faders back up as close to unity as possible, more or less within reason, okay? To give myself some space to work with. The problem is, on the faders, these faders are logarithmic, right? So the difference between a jump in volume of 1 dB, or from minus 6 dB to minus 5 dB, is not the same as a jump in volume from minus 49 dB to minus 48 dB, okay? Because it's logarithmic. So this is what they call preserving resolution or creating resolution, right? So to have my faders, I want my faders as high up as possible to allow the volume to move as much as possible on the faders. So to do that, after I pull the faders down, I have these gain plugins, which I then pull them, and I could grab a whole bunch of them and pull them down in one sweep, and then push the faders back up into more usable range. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But you're changing the gain staging for the next plugins, which has their own rules. Like what should be the gain staging for the plugins, which is not necessarily, like, it's not related to the faders at all.
Yeah, so that is why this is something that needs to be done before you start dynamic mixing. This will take me a good solid day to make sure I get this sorted out, because I do not want to mess with these gain plugins when I now start grabbing compressors and EQs and stuff. Because as you say, that now because now you're affecting the gain going into a plugin, right? So yes. Now, I don't know if you all have a different way of doing this or so. I mean, we can talk about it a little bit. But this to me is 80% of the mixing process right here. Getting that static mix right is by far the most important thing to me. Anybody has any comments on that?
I start with getting it right at the source. I want to play the part right, and then I'll do the gain staging, which Studio One makes a little bit simpler, more straightforward. But
I'm sorry, say that again, please, Mike.
So basically, I try to get the components right at the source first. Make sure I get the right levels, the right tone, and everything. Guitars in tune, the vocals in tune, whatever. And start with that. Then I gain stage those to make a match across the range, like what you're doing after the fact, through the plugin. And then I can that's the way Studio One allows you to handle it. You can use a volume envelope or just take that line and stretch it till it hits the static volume level that you want to have, like -14 or something for each level. and then I'd work with the faders after that.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing is, this is not my track. So I didn't have the luxury of being able to track these things at, I don't want to say the correct level, but at a level that would have negated the need to gain stage afterwards, right? So, and this is the whole thing. You don't know, at least for me. I mean, I'm in the process of writing a song right now. I don't have any idea how many instruments I'm going to need down in the end. So you can try your best to aim for your input levels to be, your minus 12 to your minus 18, which is what they say. You can try that all you want. But as the mix gets denser and denser, you're going to have no choice but to do some gain staging along the way.
Yeah, I agree. We're in agreement. It's just a different process.
Yeah.
We're all probably doing the same thing, just differently.
Yeah. So this is how, I mean, and we have a couple Logic people. I know, David, you're a Logic guy as well, right? I mean, how do you achieve gain staging?
Not anywhere near as sort of elegant as that, really. As I said, we've usually started with more kind of a static mix. I'll often find I'll probably end up using a lot of the gain as well to adjust volume within tracks as well. So I'll probably get too much into drawn automation curves to handle some of that. But generally, I'm trying to get as good as I can. I probably hindered you a bit on this project, by the way, because obviously what you were getting exported was almost like the levels from my mix.
Yeah, but that's okay. No problem. It's my job to take whatever you give me and do my best with it.
So for me, it's probably the simple answer is probably not something I do enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. To me, this doesn't seem like a DAW specific thing. This seems like a generic way of approaching mixes in general. I don't care which DAW does which way. It's a matter of how you want to do it. And I'm interested in the methodology here because I don't have one. I do something whenever I feel like doing, and that's probably the wrong thing.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. The workflow you have to develop a good workflow, and you have to, at least for me, like I said, that static mix is something I will spend a solid day on minimum, and at the end of it, I'll actually bounce the static mix out I completely come out of Logic, and when I come back to it later in the night or the next day, I will listen to the static mix by itself and start to think, okay, what am I hearing here? Does this sound good, or is there anything still out of balance?
Yeah, my main takeaway from this is that I need to pay more attention to signal flow along the way, which I have not been doing. So I need to know what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, what comes fourth. So every time I make an adjustment, I don't screw up what I've already done.
Oh yeah, for sure. For me, my process is always to start with the drums, mixing the drums first, then a bass, then maybe like the guitars, then the synthesizers, which are usually very easy to mix because synthesizers don't really need any compression. It's just like some EQ to clean them up. And the very last thing would be the vocals. But workflow is everything. I need to have things color coded. I need to have things, in a very organized fashion like this, so I can find what I'm looking for. Things can get really complicated very quickly. And in this case here, I also had the drums just grouped together on a bus as well, just so that I can affect the overall level of them like that. And I added just a little bit of compression at the end, very low ratio and stuff. Once again, just to kind of tighten them up, and glue them all together a little bit. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, I've talked my head off. Any further questions or anything? Anything you want to see?
I have a question about the static mix.
Sure.
When you say static mix, does it include the space, like the reverbs, delays, or not?
No. Reverb, ambience, all these buses are the very, very last thing I will do in a mix. So
you also do the panning, right?
What's that?
I mean, I do the volume panning, the field width. Some things are in the left channel, some
yes.
in the right channel. I do that.
Yeah, panning I'll probably do in the static mix. Yeah. But so, for instance, this is David's folder right here. if it'll open. Come on. Okay, so I have the static mix, right? I have the dynamic mix dry. That means no ambience whatsoever. And then I have the dynamic mix, which is basically the mix down. And then I even did a master as well, right? So these are my stages. And it's important for me, I don't know why my brain works like this, but I hear things better when they're bounced out of a door. For some reason, when I listen to things and I have Logic open and like I'm seeing, faders jumping up and down and stuff, I miss things, or I just hear them differently. So bouncing them out of Logic into these sort of files here, it just gives me so much better objectivity. It's something you could try, if you want. Just it's sensory deprivation, right? All of these things. There's so many things to get distracted from just looking at this whole mixing board here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that, Khalid, because I have the exact same problem.
Oh yeah,
I think
sure.
ADD is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but key part of my workflow is often like bounce stuff at various stages, then go download it onto the iPad and listen there, really, and then to and fro that a fair bit.
Yep. Yeah, guys. So once again, I don't have anything left to talk about on the agenda. But if you have any other questions, by all means.
I have
Thanks for the effort
Go ahead.
that you put into this, Khalid. I really appreciate what you've done here. This is helpful.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you very much for your time.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. Not at all. One thing I would like to suggest is if you find that this session is, this project is something worthwhile looking into, with David's permission, if you want, we can arrange another session at some point where we look at another aspect of how I've mixed things here, whether it's mixing the vocals or, whatever, mixing the guitars, how I pan things, maybe how I've created different, set up my sound stage for the ambience, anything you want, right? If you want to use this as a working platform to get into things, by all means. It's not going anywhere.
Fine by me. Yeah. Thanks again for kind of mixing the track also. I think at the minute my head's probably about to explode. There's too much to think about.
Yeah, we've talked a lot. We've talked for 2 hours straight about this stuff. So I think we've exhausted everything we could do in one session.
That's too bad, because I have 2 questions. And I'm not sure they're 100% related or necessarily that we need to answer them now.
Tell me.
I have generic issues where the bass notes seem to drop out of the mix. And it's not because they're not exactly the same volume, because I listen to them in solo and everything is just fine, and I look at the mix and they're compressed enough, but they just disappear from my hearing. And again, we don't have to talk about this now, but if there's any generic things that I can look at to alleviate that, maybe this dynamic EQ is the answer there. Maybe it's the kick that's interfering and I'm just not able to discern that that's what it is. Or maybe there's other instruments that are in that area that are dropping especially the lower notes, the lowest notes, the low note E, the lowest note on the bass seems to disappear a lot.
Masking issue, so that, yeah.
Right. I mean, I'd love to just chat about that at some point in the future, not necessarily today. And one question about drum routing. I saw that you had like five there. That's right. 5 different outputs. So when you guys are doing mixing drums and you have the ability to basically create as many channels as you want, do you usually pick, obviously kick and snare, how many more do you typically pick? Separate out the various toms into different channels, or the microphone above the hi-hat or the low hi-hat, or I mean, how much do you really need to play with in general?
I say whatever it takes to get the sound you want.
All right, that's it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so in terms of
they always throw me because I'm trying to do some stereo effect with one cymbal over here and another one here, and then maybe the snare. But with the overheads, it's like all right up the middle. Or if you pull them over to right, for instance, you'll get the snare coming out of the right. That doesn't sound like that's always been a trouble spot for me when it comes to mixing drums. A lot of times I will just simply bring those down and only bring them up just enough to barely hear.
Okay, so the overheads is definitely one of the channels that you want to separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is on the overheads the signal that David gave me here for the overheads was an actually interesting thing because it was an overhead, it had all this it had all the bleed from the snare and everything else, and I didn't have a dedicated signal for just the cymbals. So what I did is I treated that like a cymbal channel because I had a dedicated snare channel. So the first thing I did is I took this EQ and I scooped out everything under the cymbals. So everything under here, there's a ton of information under here, and it's all the snare and kick and everything else that I did not want. So what's remaining is just the like the crash and the ride and that sort of thing, and that's what I used to mix the cymbals for the choruses.
Right, and if you'd had those isolated, you could have just done it with those tracks.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
good.
This was, to be honest, this was actually a really interesting drum kit to mix. And I mean, I certainly learned a lot. Thanks, David, for letting me play around with this, because there were some different challenges. Even I think because you can see here, I had to mute. So I muted everything here because. So all this here is hi-hat and snares and everything, but there are no cymbals here. So during his verses and his intro and everything, there were no cymbals, just hi-hat. But I have a hi-hat channel here. So what was happening is if I played the overheads with the hi-hat channel, I was getting doubled the hi-hat, right? So I had no choice but to mute these sections here to get to isolate excuse me, to isolate the cymbals. That's the only way I was able to get it. So very interesting challenge. Yeah.
Okay, well,
So,
thank you. This was great, Khaled. I'm just so appreciative of you doing this.
no problem.
Yep, same here. Look forward to the next one.
Yep. Sorry, hopefully my voice will be in better shape next time.
I'm going to have to go now. It's great to finally see the faces behind some of the names, and look forward to the next one.
Right.
Yep.
Too.
Great seeing everybody, and thanks for coming again.
All right. I'm gonna kill this thing. So, thank you all for coming. Really, really appreciate it. And Khaled, I'm going to share the link to this at some point in the not too distant future.
No problem.
So others can appreciate it. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Yep.
All right, have a good one.
Yep.
Bye bye.